In my opinion, one of the biggest upsides to competitive Pokemon, particularly singles, is choice. For example, if you don't really like the current generation of Pokemon, like, I do myself, I'm not a fan of Generation 8, it doesn't matter, you can just go play a generation that you do like. For example, I like Generation 1, I like Generation 3, and I've been getting back into Gen 5, so that's what I play. That's great. And even then, if you get sick of Overused, no one's saying you can't try a different tier. I've really enjoyed going back to revisit like Generation 3 Ubers, Generation 1 UU. Been a lot of fun. But this does raise a bit of a problem. When you have so many different generations, each with so many different tiers, there's gonna be a few things that pop up that occasionally aren't that competitive. There's gonna be Pokemon that can be problematic, and particularly there's gonna be moves, combinations of moves, or even abilities that are going to be really, really uncompetitive. At the end of the day, Pokemon is a Goo Gaga baby game first, and a competitive game like 4th or 5th. So sometimes the community has to step in and go, right, this thing here, this is bad. This has to go. And because of that, that's why today we're going to be talking about some of the banned strategies, particularly in generations 1 to 5. First up, we're going to talk about a pair of moves that are actually pretty bad, and those are Dig and Fly. Dig and Fly are pretty good when you're just playing through the game single player, because they take 2 turns to actually use. The first turn you use the move, you just enter a semi-invulnerable state, and the second turn is when you actually hit the opponent. The reason this is fine in single player is for some reason the opponent almost never switches. Always found that weird. But against actual people, these moves are really bad, and the main reason why is they can just, watch you use Dig or Fly, right? In a game where prediction is so important, telling the opponent what you're going to be doing the next turn is usually pretty bad, because they can really easily play around it. So, while that's why those moves are dog shit, let's talk about why they're banned in Generation 1. These moves are not banned because they're too good. They're not. They're still bad. But they're banned because there's an extremely abusable glitch associated with them. See, during that first turn where you're semi-invulnerable, the only things that can hit you in Generation 1 are Swift, which sucks, Bide, which really sucks, and Transform, which doesn't actually, attack you, and is also on Ditto, which sucks. Now, this would normally be fine because, again, they're bad moves. But the problem is, if you hit yourself in confusion, or more importantly, get fully paralyzed while using Dig or Fly, you exit the move, but you retain the semi-invulnerability. This is a problem, because it means you can use all of your moves as if you weren't using Dig or Fly, but you're also kind of invincible, and you can only be hit by those 3 moves, which again, suck and are not run by anything. Hypothetically, if this was legal, it would be really, really easy to abuse, because paralysis is everywhere in Generation 1. It's an extremely integral part of the metagame. There's a really funny Smogon forum about someone arguing that this should be legal, just because they want to use their in-game team, and saying shit like, oh, you could just not use Thunder Wave on Pokemon that have Dig. Now, that's a pretty fucking big reach, because, again, it's a really integral part of the metagame. But even looking past that, you can get around that by just predicting. You could switch your Pokemon that had Dig or Fly into a No, yeah, you could. I was confused for a minute because I was like, wait, Dig? Ground type. Ground type immune to Thunder Wave. And then I stopped being a fucking idiot and I remembered like, oh yeah, you don't have to be ground type to learn Dig. What the fuck is wrong with me? Yeah, but you could just like have Dig and Fly and switch into Thunder Wave and get paralyzed yourself, and then there you go. This actually already happens in Generation 1, but for different reasons. A common strategy is to intentionally switch your Chansey into a predicted Thunder Wave so that it becomes paralyzed. The reasoning behind this is that paralysis isn't typically a massive deal for Chansey. It makes an already slow Pokemon slower, and while the 25% chance to be unable to move each turn can be frustrating, Chansey probably gets the most free turns in the game thanks to her massive bulk. You're basically allowing your Chansey to receive a minor handicap in the form of paralysis to be immune to 2 crippling statuses, Sleep, which can leave you out of commission for up to 7 turns, and Freeze, which, while harder to inflict, is just pretty much a KO. In the context of a Pokemon with Dig or Fly though, you're not switching in on a predicted Thunder Wave, for an immunity to other more dangerous statuses. You're switching in on a predicted Thunder Wave for what is essentially a 25% chance to just win the game. Which, I think it's pretty clear why that's not good. That's very unhealthy. Let's move on to Generation 2 and talk about the Sleep Trap ban. This is a pretty simple one to explain. It just means that you're not allowed to have a combination of a sleep-inducing move like Hypnosis or Lovely Kiss, and a trapping move like Mean Look or Spiderweb on the same set. I think it's pretty self-explanatory why that's a problem. It can just create situations where there isn't counterplay. Like, what do you do when your Pokemon is put to sleep? Well, you can't attack, so you switch out so your opponent doesn't get free turns. What do you do when your Pokemon gets trapped? Well, you can't switch out, so you might as well just attack the Pokemon that trapped you with whatever you got, or hope they switch out. When you combine these two things, you've got situations where you're just kinda fucked. You can't switch out to alleviate the fact that you're asleep, and you can't attack to alleviate the fact that you're trapped. On top of that, even if you wake up, there's a very realistic chance of the opponent just putting you back to sleep again, or using something like Perish Song. This is why, while you're not allowed to have a sleep-inducing move and a trapping move on the same set, you are allowed to trap a sleeping Pokemon. Pokemon like Umbreon often run Baton Pass and Mean Look on the same set, which is incredibly nasty because it means that they get to switch out while you're still trapped if they use Baton Pass, and chances are that Umbreon switched out to a Pokemon a lot more dangerous than itself. Mean Look and Baton Pass is completely legal. Baton Pass and a sleep-inducing move is completely legal. It's specifically Mean Look and a sleep-inducing move that's illegal, primarily because the combination of those two moves can lead to extremely uncompetitive play. Now, I mentioned Baton Pass there, and if you're more up to date with competitive Pokemon, you're probably familiar with the fact that the move as a whole is outright banned in Generations 6, 7, and 8. However, in Generation 3, it's got more of a complex ban. The move itself is allowed, but no more than 3 of your Pokemon can have it, and none of those Pokemon can be Smeargle. The primary reason for this is that, on its own, Baton Pass in Generation 3 isn't really a problem. There's not a massive issue with passing 1 or 2 stat boosts to one of your teammates, and some Pokemon like Jolteon even get use of it without boosting their stats. Jolteon mainly uses it to switch out of Dog Trio, even with Arena Trap up. Outside of that one specific scenario though, it's good on pretty much any Pokemon that can learn it because it's a really useful momentum keeping tool. If you use Baton Pass the same turn your opponent switches out, you get to see what Pokemon they send in before you decide what Pokemon you're going to send in, which is incredibly useful. Think of it like U-turn or Volt Switch if it didn't do damage. So while teams revolving around the move are problematic, it's still legal because on its own, it's just a genuinely useful utility move that I think adds a lot to the metagame. The issue with Baton Pass is when you have multiple Pokemon using it, with the most notorious example being Baton Pass chains, where you typically have 5 Pokemon using Baton Pass and a single Pokemon waiting to receive all of the stat boosts. These were not the most consistent teams in the world, but the issue with them is that they just needed to get lucky once or twice near the beginning of the game, and then they just snowball completely out of control. To beat these teams, you just had to break the chain as fast as possible before too many boosts were acquired by either knocking out the Pokemon or forcing a switch with something like Roar. That second option is actually why the move Ingrain was banned on Smeargle back in 2011. The main reason for this is that Baton Passing Ingrain not only grants passive recovery, but an immunity to being switched out, which just removes a form of counterplay to this strategy that, once it gets going, doesn't really have much counterplay. Mr. Mime was banned from Overused earlier this year for a similar reason. It has the ability Soundproof, which is pretty nasty in combination with Baton Pass because it means it's immune to Roar. This theme of just getting lucky once or twice and then gaining a massive advantage is a pretty common theme with a lot of banned strategies, and I would understand if you think it's a bit strange. Pokemon is inherently a bit of a luck-based game, but you do have to kind of realize it's less about luck and more a skill and prediction-based game that has elements of luck. See, the difference between the kind of luck you can expect from a Pokemon battle and these luck-reliant strategies is that in a Pokemon battle, you'll typically have multiple instances where luck is a factor, and the outcome usually isn't massive or game-defining. For example, let's say you're playing Generation 3 Overused and you're facing a Dragon Dance Tyranitar. One of the best switch-ins to that set is Swampert, specifically Raw Swampert. Now, let's say you switch in your Swampert because it's not typically threatened by the most common Dragon Dance set, which is Dragon Dance, Rock Slide, Earthquake, and Hidden Power Bug. But you switch in and you get smacked with Hidden Power Grass. Well shit, now you're in a really bad spot. Swampert could have died, and it definitely doesn't check Tyranitar anymore. So that's unlucky, right? Yeah, but the worst you're gonna lose is one Pokemon from that, right? That instance right there does not decide the game, and at the same time, it's not really unhealthy, is it? You've just learned that, oh shit, their Tyranitar is running Hidden Power Grass instead of Hidden Power Bug. Well shit, I lost my Swampert. I can take advantage of that with other Pokemon, such as Celebi. It's also important to notice, like, those side effects of moves, right? The 10% chance for freeze to happen when you land an Ice Beam, or the 10% chance for a Thunderbolt to paralyze. Those are typically fine because you're always aware of them. These are moves Pokemon very commonly run, and good players will usually tend to play around them. Look at Generation 1. Everyone plays around Ice Beam and Blizzard Freezes, right? Chansey eats Ice Beams like it's nothing. They do very little damage. But people are still reluctant to switch Chansey into Ice Beams because of Freeze. Freeze in Generation 1 is terrifying. It just incapacitates the Pokemon outright. So you do have to play around it. And if your Chansey does get frozen, shit, that's unlucky, but you knew it was a thing that could have happened, and now you're facing the consequences, which aren't you losing a game outright, it's just you losing your Chansey, which can cost you the game, but you're not losing the game because of that. It's just a factor in losing the game. These are elements of luck in a primarily skill-based game, compared to these strategies which are relying on luck to win. Now, you can't talk about luck-reliant strategies in Pokemon and not think of evasion. The evasion clause is one of Smogon's universal clauses, meaning it applies to pretty much every single tier of every single generation. And for good reason. Boosting your evasion is really, really cheap. You're not making your Pokemon stronger per se, you're just giving a chance for your opponent to miss, which isn't really very fun. Now, evasion has been banned for the longest time, and it stays banned. You know, no one ever thinks about unbanning evasion boosting moves. But something that's kind of a bit more contentious is the matter of abilities that boost your evasion, specifically Sand Veil. Now, Sand Veil was banned pretty quickly in Generation 4 and Generation 5, but it's in Generation 3 where the ability was actually introduced, where I think Sand Veil and the issue of it as a whole is that it's most interesting. How Sand Veil works is that under the effects of Sandstorm, Pokemon with Sand Veil get a boost to their evasion, meaning that moves that would normally hit 100% of the time now hit them 80% of the time. It also gives them an immunity to Sandstorm if their type already wouldn't. So, Pokemon with Sand Veil that aren't Ground, Rock, or Steel now have an immunity to Sandstorm damage. Now, the reason I think the matter of Sand Veil in Generation 3 is so much more interesting is that in Generation 4 and 5, you had really powerful Pokemon abusing Sand Veil, such as Garchomp and Gliscor. But in Generation 3, the only Pokemon abusing it in Overused were lower tier Pokemon that became viable in Overused because of Sand Veil, like Cacturne, who is never used, and Gligar, who is underused. See, the problem with these Pokemon, right, is that because Sandstorm is so prevalent in Generation 3 Overused, they don't really have any surefire counters. Like, hypothetically, if you've got a Cacturne on the field and it's trying to do its thing, which is Subseed, set up Substitute, set up Leech Seed, sit behind the sub, do whatever while the opponent just dies slowly, right? That's what it wants to do. But the problem is, If you switch to Pokemon like Gyarados into Cacturne, which should normally just beat it, right? Click Hidden Power Flying, Cacturne dies. But when you switch in your Gyarados, it's not really consistent, because you've a 20% chance to miss the Hidden Power Flying, and now Cacturne just got a substitute up for free. And now it's got a Leech Seed off because you missed the substitute, and now it's just gonna spiral out of control. These Pokemon just, again, rely on luck to really do their thing, and once they've started doing their thing, they're ludicrously hard to stop. I think a good sign that the strategy was overpowered was the fact that some people even used Cacturne alongside No, they used Cacnea alongside Cacturne. Cacnea is the Baba form. Cacturne. Can't do that. You can't use two of the same Pokemon. That's also banned, but don't worry about that. But yeah, people would use Cacturne's pre-evolved form alongside Cacturne, which I think goes to show that it's a stupid strategy, right? You are making your team worse as a whole by a significant degree, just so you can better rely on this silly luck-based strategy. I think it's pretty obvious why that was a problem. Now, as far as I can tell, Generation 4 doesn't really have any unique bans, which is a shame, but it is what it is, so we'll skip straight on to Generation 5 with a fairly recent ban I find super interesting. A universal Smogon clause is Sleep Clause, and that means you're not allowed to put an opponent's Pokemon to sleep if you've already put one of them to sleep. This is reasonable, it just makes it so that you can't press Sleep Powder 6 times and then just do whatever you want. You can only sleep one of your opponent's Pokemon, and from then on, you're gonna have to do something else unless that Pokemon wakes up. However, what if instead of being allowed to put one of your opponent's Pokemon to sleep, you are allowed to put none of them to sleep? Generation 5, all sleep-inducing moves such as Sleep Powder, Spore, Hypnosis, Sing, and even Yawn are just all banned, and this is because Sleep in Generation 5 is just too powerful. The reason Sleep is more powerful in Generation 5 than other generations is that the sleep counter, which normally dictates how many turns you're going to remain asleep, resets when you switch out in Generation 5. This means if you want to burn all your sleep turns and wake up, you've got to do them all in one setting. You can't do some, switch out, and then come back again. And this is a problem, because if you do that, you're just going to be sitting there giving the opponent free turns. This really necessitated the use of anti-sleep Pokemon and moves like Sleep Talk, but Sleep Talk is not a real reliable answer, especially to one of the most powerful things in the metagame. Yeah, you can attack while you're asleep, but what attack you get is random, and you can just pick a move that does nothing for your current situation. On top of that, you could wake up the turn you use Sleep Talk, and then you've just wasted a turn and the opponent could potentially put you back to sleep again. This is the primary reason Sleep is banned in Generation 5. On top of the fact that, as is, it's incredibly powerful, the fact that the best answer to it is luck-based, you know, it didn't sit right with a lot of players, and I would have to agree. Now you might be thinking, well, if Sleep is banned for being broken in Generation 5, why is it not banned in Generation 1? Can't you get put to sleep for 7 turns? You can't move the turn you wake up? There's no heal bell or anything like that to wake you up? Well, answer's pretty simple. It's fucking Gen 1. Everything's broken. If something's broken in Gen 5, it actually, like, sticks out. But, like, when something's broken in Generation 1, it's like biting into a fucking sandwich and going, whoa, what the fuck? There's bread in here. No, it's Gen 1. I don't know what to tell you. That's just how it is. Now, with that out the way, there's exactly one more ban strategy I want to talk about, and it revolves around one of the stupidest abilities ever implemented into Pokemon. Moody. Moody was introduced in Generation 5, and it's a fucking miracle this got past testing. It's absolutely wild. Every turn, Moody raises a random stat by 2, and lowers a random stat by 1. When you use Moody, you're pretty much just fishing for the right set of stat boosts as fast as possible so you can snowball out of control. Again, this is just completely luck-based, because you could stall for a couple turns and just get all the wrong boosts. You could get like a +4 in accuracy and a +2 in the wrong offensive stat, while your actual important stats that you wanted raised all get lowered. You could become an unstoppable monster, but you could also just, like, not. So I think it's fairly self-explanatory why this was banned. It's just very unhealthy. The ability was honestly just a mess, and wasn't just banned from overused, but Ubers as well. If you look around, you'll find horror stories of Pokemon like Glalie and even fucking Bidoof tearing up Ubers with this ability, so I think it makes sense that they got rid of it. Funnily enough, Moody was actually unbanned at the start of Generation 8, and this is primarily because it could no longer influence your evasion or your accuracy. And as I said, boosting your evasion is fucking stupid. So this just, got rid of one of the ways that Moody could still be really stupid. On top of that, the only two fully evolved Pokemon who had Moody in Generation 8 were Glalie and Octillery, who are both kind of shit. However, barely even a month into Generation 8, Moody became a problem. Glalie ran a set of Protect, Substitute, Disable, and Freeze Dry, obtaining as many free turns as possible, and then just clicking Freeze Dry until the opposing team was gone. You could argue whether or not it was actually broken, but it's pretty undeniably uncompetitive, so even as someone who doesn't play Generation 8, I think this was the right move. So yeah, those are all the ban strategies I wanted to talk about. I do think they're really interesting, and I appreciate all the work that goes into, deciding what's okay and what's not okay in tiering and such. But I do get that a lot of people aren't a fan of bans, and that's okay. Some people just want like a pure experience, they don't want to be told what they can or can't use, and I get that, I really do, but you do gotta understand that sometimes a pure experience would lead to the turn counter rolling over to 640 while you have 5 of your Pokemon put to sleep. So, nevertheless, I do really appreciate the work that goes in. And besides, if you want no restrictions, there's a tier for that. It's called Anything Goes. And you can use pretty much whatever strategy you want. You can use really broken Pokemon that are too good even for Ubers, like Generation 4 Arceus, Mega Rayquaza, the fucking dog with the knife. Zacian, yeah, you can use Zacian in Anything Goes. Both forms, they're both Anything Goes. I don't know who fucking thought that thing was okay, but, if you want to use that, you can. I don't. Bye.